The first hunt and the sundering of the healing church, being a transcription from the private writings of an unnamed dissenter and cleric, late of Byrgenwerth and founding cleric of the healing church. Prefatory statement. I write this not as a heretic, nor as a traitor, though by the standards of the High Cathedral I shall be named as both. What I set down now by pale lamplight and with trembling hand is the last duty I owe to this new science of history. Let the towers fall, let the bells toll for their own dead, but let the truth endure. They will say the healing church was born of divine insight, that the blood itself chose Lawrence, and that Yharnam was always the blessed cradle of ministration. But that is a lie so old and so often sung that it has become a hymn, for I was there when the truth was still a fledgling. Master Lawrence, first vicar of the healing church, had already departed Byrgenwerth by then. The schism had split the college clean through. Master Willem remained ossified in his dogma. We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. He forbade its use and forbade expiration. Lawrence defied him. He came into Yharnam as a stranger, as a scholar turned exile, and the city was no more in those days than a warren of narrow alleys and narrower minds. Its wisdom was passed in whispers and glyphs, its physicians mere leeches in scholars' robes. There was no science here, no healing, only bloodletting and superstition. It was in a forgotten chapel, an old temple to some owl-headed death god cloaked in waning incense, rotted with mildew, that Master Lawrence established his first clinic. He called it the Church of the Good Chalice, a name that cloaked what was in time to have been proven as his experiment in piety. From there he plied his craft not as a preacher, but as an itinerant healer and miracle worker. He brought light to that benighted place, Yharnam, or so we thought. The knowledge he carried from Byrgenwerth was formidable. Injections, transfusions, infusions of substances and fluids from animals into mortal human persons for their health and for their revival. Crude maps and discourses and studies on the nature of humors and of the cardiocentric being of thought and mind and wisdom and of emotion. An inkling, yes, only that, of pathogens. Enough to outstrip any Yharnamite leech doctor by leagues, but he was cautious then. He did not yet reach for what he had brought with him from Byrgenwerth, the old blood, not openly, not yet. That was the beginning. It was said in my day among the higher clerics, those who had known the healing church not merely as an institution, but as a living and formative thing, grasping and stretching for its wings, that there was a trace of truth in the old wives' tale. The saying went that once there was a young boy who wanted nothing more than to be a doctor. Indeed, there are few alive now who can remember such a sentiment, such a saying, and fewer still who would dare admit it. For to remember that the healing church was once a house of healing and not of bloodlust and of faded flame is to court heresy, and yet I am quite certain now that the boy in that old wives' tale was indeed Lawrence himself. He had not always been the towering figure memorialized in statues and clerical seals before the great vestments, and before the first hunt and before the schism, he was a student, a boy with a book under one arm and too many questions on his tongue. In those early days, Byrgenwerth had not yet ossified into the vault of horror, stretching its grim shades over Yharnam, and horrors breeding yet still in the ghastly shade it cast over that place. Byrgenwerth arose not as some sovereign fortress of academia, but as a place of pilgrimage for the mind. In its heyday, it was unrivaled, a radiant citadel of thought perched above the mists of the Forbidden Woods, as they're now called. No place of learning, no library, no archive, no university on the continent could compare, and certainly not benighted and backward Yharnam, whose only claim to scholarship was the mistaken scribble of gravekeepers. They came to Byrgenwerth in droves, boys from noble houses and urchins from the alleyways of forgotten hamlets, and squires, strays, sons of statesmen, and sons of no one at all. And there, eventually, under the eye of Provost Willem and his circle of fellows, they were instructed in all that might be known and much that should not, anatomy and physiology and cosmology and metaphysics, the arcane and the ineffable. But Byrgenwerth had not always been so refined. The annals of the college tell of an older Byrgenwerth, rougher and more pedestrian, long before brick and cloister, before Willem himself, if one can imagine such a time. There were only tents pitched in a clearing, the canopy overhead and mud beneath, by a great lake. Traveling scholars, sages on errantry, would pause in their wanderings and teach the woodfolk, who emerged cautiously from the forest paths, and they came with payment: cloth, apples, cider, beer, seeking nothing more than an egg's worth of education. And in those days it was known to them in their vanished tongue as Byrgenwerth, the place of the travelling scholars, a word which in their old tongue means the worth of the tomb, the worth of the burial mound, they said. It was a name born of reverence and superstition, a place where wisdom and death slept beside one another like brothers. But now perhaps in our modern tongue, the name lingers with a different meaning, a different ring. Worth bygone, a thing that once had worth and has since lost it. And perhaps that is the truest name of all. All this will be more thoroughly perhaps examined in an earlier, that is, in a later chapter. But nevertheless, all this to say that the history of Byrgenwerth, its past and its foundation, are inexorably bound up with its end. And the end of Byrgenwerth is in itself the beginning of this nightmare. In its heyday, at its apex, to have seen it, to arrive there as a young boy, even from fair stock and high birth, to be a first-year scholar, born as lord of a manor in the far west of Cainhurst Castle even. There was nothing like to it, to be in the midst of things, in the middle of things, by the time of the provostship and presidency and mastery of Willem, provost, who to this day is beyond question, it must be said, the greatest religious, historical, scientific, and metaphysical genius ever to have graced our land. At its apex, the great halls of the college ran with thought, undergraduates, graduates, fellows, visiting scholars, Professors, conveners, deans, vice provosts, chairs of research into certain properties of metals in the earth, into strange studies of the humors, of the alignments between celestial and heavenly bodies and ours, into the nature of language and of thought and of music and the correlation between all those individual disciplines and the shape of the stars and the movements of fundamental forces and their relationship to the feelings and minds and thoughts of men, a veritable paradise. But it was, however, also an orphanage. If anybody is alive, contemporary to my writing of this, they may perhaps understand more keenly than any after that the sad, grim horror that has befallen this land is a story of children and parents. Parents who lack children, and children who lack parents. And indeed, I may single-handedly vouch for the fact. Master Lawrence, first vicar and founder of the Healing Church, anointed son, by adoption, beloved, right-hand man and deputy, successor, would-be successor of Master Willem, in a time gone by, had, like so many others, arrived at Byrgenwerth as an orphan. Yet Byrgenwerth, under Master Willem, was an essentially meritocratic institution. Nobility or ignominy counted for naught, and Master Lawrence ascended not merely through favor or charm, but through prowess, for reasons owing to both vows earnestly made by this author to Provost Willem and to Master Lawrence and his successors, cardinals and clerics of the Healing Church. The specific circumstances relating to the discovery of the old blood I cannot utter. Suffice it to say, as has been heard among the small folk, high-born and low, once, long ago, a group of young Byrgenwerth scholars discovered a holy medium deep within the tomb beneath Byrgenwerth. This discovery led to the establishment of the Institute of Blood Healing, and old blood ministration, it is said, will always be traced back to Byrgenwerth. The Tomb of the Gods, carved out below Yharnam, is a location that should be familiar to every hunter. I can say no more than that I was among the number who left Byrgenwerth, along with Master Lawrence and many others, in what has been referred to in the archives and chronicles of the Healing Church as the Byrgenwerth Schism. Minding my vows and oaths of silence for the good of the world and of the future, I am permitted to say this. What was discovered beneath Byrgenwerth was very much a thesis proved. The Tomb of the Gods was discovered, and in it remnants, lifeblood, fire of the gods. Perhaps it will long have been forgotten, but there it was in years gone by, a tale told at supper in the halls of Byrgenwerth at high table, before the discovery, before the breaking through to the labyrinth to the Tomb of the Gods. And Vice Dean Elmric would tell the story he had heard from a far and distant land, the story of creation, or cosmogony, as he had called it. It was a story of a man who had discovered a fire that was in the possession of the gods, that had not been given to created things, to mortals. And in time he ascended a great mountain, the dwelling place of the powers of the world, under cover of night through many enchantments and deceits and chicaneries, and stole this fire and brought it to the world below, which was near perpetually in darkness, and for a time the light and the fire seemed good. But men in this far-off land did not understand the nature of that which they were holding, of that which was illuminating their world as they thought, and they sought to fill all things with that light that did not belong to earthly and mortal and created things, and a fire engulfed that far-off land, and they perished. Let the reader understand, Weisstein Elmric's story from a far-off land is the story of Byrgenwerth, of the Healing Church, and of Yharnam. But rather than stealing fire from the gods, in slow screws thread ascent of a mountain, we plunged into the earth, and some sought to fear it, and some sought to control it, believing it could be harnessed at all. And so the stories go that Master Lawrence, first vicar of the Healing Church, was first among those who wished to use it and harness it. And Master Willem, so they say, wished to bury it and speak no more of it. So the stories say. But this is not a true story.